Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Ripley episode 3. It's called Sommerso. So spoilers for the episode as always. And this of course is a Patreon sponsored review, so thanks to Fletcher for picking Ripley. This is a big turning point in this show. Something that I didn't expect necessarily to happen as early as it does here, which is the murder of Dickie. He's dead by the end of this episode. In fact, after the first third or so of this episode, where it sets everything up, we spend a long time just watching the murder itself, but especially the cover up and like all the steps that come in afterwards, just in silence. This very much was reminding me of a lot of what I like about this director when he did The Night Of, where it's more about noticing the details and going through it methodically and really enjoying the process. And it's almost funny at some points as well, because Ripley, as we've talked about before, isn't necessarily always the best at what he does. Like, he makes mistakes and does like a stupid thing occasionally, and it's almost comical at one point how he keeps getting hit with the boat when we get to that part of the episode. But yeah, obviously things are bubbling up at the start of the episode. Dickie gets a letter from his father, which Ripley's very concerned about because he doesn't get a chance to see it. He goes to the post office and he gets a letter for himself and is deeply concerned that Dickie already picked up his mail. So unlike last episode, he can't sneak a peek first. And then when he reads the letter that he got, it says that he's basically been let go of his responsibilities. Dickie's father's not going to pay him anymore. This is the end of that grift. It's the end of that road. So Ripley tries to see if he can get a hold of the other letter, and Dickie's not even read it yet. You know, he looks through his desk, his drawers, but ultimately it's still in Dickie's pocket, and Dickie's sitting painting some flowers or something. And Ripley sits down on the couch, Dickie's jacket's at the end of the couch, and he's trying to get his hand in to get the letter out. And this is one of those little moments in this show that I feel like they've done a few of now, where I get really uncomfortable that he might get caught. And there's already been one or two examples where he's being caught and I felt deeply uncomfortable by it. So the show doesn't necessarily pull punches there, so you genuinely don't know if it is going to have him be caught. Of course, unless you've already seen or read the story before, in which case you probably have a good idea. But I didn't, right? I didn't know that we were going to like bubble up to this point already. But it does feel like Ripley's going down the drain a little bit, like the plan is starting to spiral, and he spies on Dickie reading the letter, which seems to catch him off guard, and then he hears some of what he's saying to Marge, and it sounds like, hey, his dad's warning him that this guy Ripley could be a bit of a liar, he could be a cheat, maybe don't trust him. So they seemingly make a plan to deal with him, and we go through a couple of sequences where they invite Ripley out to lunch and they take him out. Basically, Dickie suggests, hey, maybe it'd be fun to go to this other town or city for a couple of days this weekend. And Marge says, oh no, I'm in the flow of writing, I can't go. So he's like, hey, what about it, Ripley? How about we just go? Or Marge says that, I think, how about you two just go? And he says, yeah, sure. But the entire time, there's a really interesting vibe to the scene, because you get the feeling the entire time, much like Ripley gets the feeling the entire time, that everything they're doing right now is not spur of the moment. They have talked about what they're going to say to him. They have come up with a plan to get rid of him somehow. And this is part of that plan. So he has to sit there and play dumb and act like he's being pleasant, act like this is all a nice suggestion, but we know that they're actually plotting against him. Now, I've never been in this specific situation. I probably imagine that almost no one in the history of Earth has been in this specific situation. But I've definitely been like around a couple who clearly have discussed something that they want to either bring up or kind of avoid with you. Like, I've definitely been in that situation, and it's clear that they have had a discussion and that they've came up with a plan of attack where they're going to be on each other's side, and you just kind of have to go through it. And even though it's kind of clear that they've had this prior conversation, it feels awkward. It's a very awkward scenario to be in, regardless of whether or not they're in the right for whatever they're trying to avoid you doing with them, or vice versa. I've definitely been in just that, again, a very, very minor equivalent to this, but just that core feeling of you were not part of a previous conversation where they're planning on railroading you into a certain decision or a certain thing of some kind. I thought that tone and that mood throughout these scenes was really good. And everything, like on this trip where Dickie takes him to this other city via train, even just the moment where Tom is in the train station looking up at the board, I thought that basically Dickie was just not going to show up. But then he walks into frame with the tickets, and I'm like, oh, he is going with them. I was like, is he just going to ditch him in this other city? Is he just going to like make it clear that he's not welcome to come back? And that's kind of what he's going to do, but it's a lot more pleasant. He does sort of try and go about it nicely and give him a nice talk about it and whatnot. But it's all very orchestrated. There's all a lot of these things. But also, as this is all playing out, there's a lot of little details that Ripley's paying attention to. Like, obviously, he keeps staring at Dickie's ring and his watch, the things that he wants from him. He pays close attention to the fact that Dickie puts his checking account and some of his other valuables in the hotel safe when they arrive. And he's really paying attention to this. In fact, one of the things that really stuck out was that when they go into the hotel, the concierge is very much eyeing up Ripley and is kind of suspicious of like him being there. And it just kind of felt like, at the time, it was like another example of someone being weird and sort of sensing that Ripley's not to be trusted, maybe in a way that Dickie couldn't initially, at least. Although I think he does now. But Dickie's at least good at sort of pretending that he's still just his normal, charming self. But of course, when everything goes down later, this concierge becomes an issue because he knows that Ripley was here with someone else. He saw them together. So he's going to be a potential obstacle once things go down. It was something that popped into my head once we get so far into the episode, past the murder itself, but not quite, when we got back to the hotel, sort of more on the way back where I realized, oh, he's going to be an issue, and still potentially could be going forward. So all these little details in your mind, kind of like sort of noting them, right? That's what the night of was very good at as well. Like during the first episode of that, where this murder happens and we've got someone who's suspected of it, but there's all these little moments where he touches something and you're like, oh shit, his fingerprints are now on that, and your mind kind of logs it. And it was a very satisfying watch because of that. This was very similar. This is the most similar I felt to that show from Ripley, is this episode, because it's doing a lot of these little moments where the character's just like thinking on his feet, and like the problems that have been set up start to pop up via whatever, right? The next day, Dickie wants to go find this perfume for Marge, which he eventually does, but it takes like half the day. And he comes up to see Ripley, who's told to wait for him at the beach. And Ripley's all impressed because there's these guys doing like a human pyramid. And he kind of claps and says something in Italian to them. Dickie points out that they're gay. I mean, that's not the word he uses, but he says they're fairies, I think was the phrase that he used. And Ripley turns and says, well, so what if they are? That was impressive. And Dickie just doesn't really know how to respond to that. But it's kind of a fair point. For as much as Ripley's kind of the bad guy, he's got kind of a point with this. Obviously, this is set at a very different time period, but that did stick out to me. But Dickie wants to take him out on a boat, right? Or he says, let's do something you want to do. How about we take a boat out? So he rents a small boat from a guy on the beach for a couple hours to go out. And even as this was happening, I was thinking to myself, oh, this is part of Dickie's plan. Like, he's suggested this like it's a spur of the moment thing, but I think he wants it to be isolated. He wants this conversation to not be public in case it gets rowdy. I think he's expecting that Ripley's not going to take it well. And for him, the idea of having this conversation on a little boat that's surrounded by nothing but water, far away from everyone, is what Dickie wants to not create a scene and try and handle it as, compartmentalized as possible. Of course, what he's actually doing is putting himself in a position where there's nothing to stop Ripley from potentially reacting very badly. And while we've had the idea that Ripley's going to take his life from him, like to steal his identity, to be more precise, I don't know if I necessarily thought it was going to like I expected murder to come into it, absolutely. But I didn't necessarily expect that his initial plan involved murdering him. I thought he was going to steal his identity without actually killing him, and just so the idea that he's going to try and get away with doing this without that. and maybe he's forced into it here, or maybe he was always going to kill him. I mean, that's entirely possible. But Ripley takes this news when Dickie says they're going to spend Christmas with his friend, and maybe, Ripley can't go with them. So Ripley says, what am I going to do then? And he's like, well, about that, we were thinking maybe it's time for you to go around and check out the rest of Italy. There's so much more to see. And it's all, it's very awkward, but Ripley tries to play it cool and says, no, you're right. It's probably time to move on. You're right. And Dickie's like, oh, you're taking this better than I thought. And it's when he goes to start the engine that Ripley just picks up the oar and starts hitting him over the head with the oar. And this, I really liked how this was presented. All of this looked good. I mean, even as they were riding out on the boat, there was an underwater shot looking up at the boat. I mean, honestly, this episode has what I would call a extended action sequence. Mainly when Ripley falls out the boat and is getting hit with the both the boat itself, but also the what do you call it, the anchor, right? The big stone anchor, right? Which he's going to try and use to weigh down Dickie's body, but he gets hit with that on the head at one point, and almost to a comical amount. But all of this felt like, oh, there's a lot more money went into this episode. There's actual things. There's fire even. There's going to be fire in this episode, which maybe it's not actually that much of a budget increase when you're shooting in all these really nice locations. And while I'm sure some of this is being faked in sets or places that can mimic parts of Italy, it does feel like there's a lot of stuff in Italy as well. I could be wrong. Maybe they're just being very good with the trickery. But regardless, I liked the pacing of this kill, because one hit just sort of really, shakes up Dickie, and he's bleeding, but he's kind of what the hell, and he's kind of looking up at him. Ripley hits him again. So there's multiple moments between these hits, because it takes maybe 4 or 5 hits, something like that, to finally kill him. In between the hits, he has to look Dickie in the eyes. He has to reveal the monster that he is to him as he's dying. So Dickie knows as he's dying just how much of a bastard Ripley is. It's not like he never knows who did this to him, or he's caught off guard and he's gone. He gets just enough time to process the type of monster that he is. In fact, Dickie even is asking for help. He's begging for help from Ripley before the final blows to the head. And every time he hit him in the head or the face, it looked violent. It looked visceral. You see a proper hit, and you feel the oomph of it. I thought that was all really good stuff. It really sold a lot of these. It sold it as a big payoff to the build up of the last 2.5 episodes, I felt. And then from there, we get all the little moments of him taking off the ring, but the ring won't come off, so he has to use the blood. He puts his hand onto where the wound is and gets some blood to ease off the ring from the ring finger, and then he washes it in the ocean. He just dips it over the edge to clean it and puts it in his pocket, and he does that with a couple other things, the lighter and stuff. I think what I love about this, though, is, again, just how methodical it is, where it's sort of beat by beat all the things that he's trying to do. For example, even just trying to separate the anchor, the rope from the boat. He can't cut it. He tries to use the lighter, but that doesn't work. And he eventually pours some of the excess fuel onto it and sets fire to that. I actually thought he poured on far too much for this, but hey, it worked. So who am I to judge? But he eventually rips that off, and one of the great little moments here is when he's about to throw Dickie overboard. He stands up and he's about to do it, and then he just notices a little sailboat in the distance, one that's maybe close enough to see what happens if he does it right now. So he has to get the engine on and sail away for a little bit to try and get to more desolate territory where there's no one around. But the reveal of that, because it's silent, it was really effective, right? You don't hear it. There's it's a sailboat. There's no noise. There's no engine in the distance. You just, he looks around after spending some time prepping the weight or whatever, and this boat's just there. But then you've also got the stuff where when he does put the anchor into the water, the body doesn't just go in, but again, making Ripley look dumb, he gets tripped up by the rope as it's going out and falls not only into the water, but he hits the lever on the engine as he goes into the water, so the boat's actually just free roaming around with him in the water. And we get this excessive sequence of him trying to climb back onto the boat, And there's a lot of underwater shots here. It's all very pretty. It looks good. It feels like a big moment. But my favorite thing about the whole sequence, honestly, is when he finally gets back into the boat and he's actually going to put Dickie into the water now. He sits Dickie up on the edge and he effectively sits next to him side by side. And in the way he pushes him in, it's not like a big dramatic moment where he's like, you know, either regretful or even like, I hate you, off you go. He pushes him in a very kind of dismissive way where it, like he's just shrugging him off, like, you were just a pawn in my plan. I do not care about you. Shove. And he just shoves him in. I think the presence of the dead body the entire time really added to this scene. It really felt like it added to like just how inhuman Ripley is, that he's doing all this and doesn't care the dead body's there. The way he uses the guy's own blood to like get his ring off, like all these little details just really speak to who this character is. But also it does show that this is relatively unplanned in the sense that, you know, he's clearly accelerating things because he was about to be shoved out of his life. This moment was an opportunity, but it comes with a lot of cleaning up after. For example, like disposing of the boat, which ends up taking another several minutes of screen time, where he tries to set the boat on fire. He covers it in gasoline. He gets to like a little reef area that's like secluded. He tries to burn the boat and it just doesn't work. And honestly, that was darkly kind of funny. Like, I was actually entertained by that. I was enjoying all of this stuff. And I looked at the time around here and realized, oh, we're just spending like most of this episode dealing with him, like in the aftermath of this kill, of like everything he has to do to try and cover up and get out of town and get the stuff from the safe and all these other little things that he has to deal with. He eventually puts a bunch of rocks into the boat to weigh it down and then sort of pushes it down so it sinks, and it does eventually go down. But notably, the engine of the boat, because he's not pushed it deep enough into the water, so the engine of the boat's still sticking out a little bit and he can't really quite do anything about it, so he just leaves it, which I think is also another just example of him just not being quite good enough, right? He's went through all this effort. He's realizing, oh shit, like I need to like hide this boat somehow. I can't, you know, he can't just take it back to the guy that rented it out, because the guy who rented it out saw them together. He knows the other guy was there with him, so but he just leaves this sticking out. He just kind of like gives up and says that's good enough almost. Now, admittedly, I'm not sure how much of an option he has right now, given that he's already weighed it down. He probably can't push it anymore now that it's at the bottom. But I don't know, maybe he could like hit the engine off or something, or try and dismantle part of it so that he can, you know, just separate it and throw it into the water. Not that he has any tools nearby, admittedly. I'm spitballing, right? But I suppose maybe his main concern is getting out. And I thought he was going to have a bigger rough time trying to get back to the hotel. It felt like he was in kind of like a, you know, a really rocky cliffside area, and maybe he'd have a hard time even getting back to civilization. But he does. It just cuts to him back in a street. And he actually sees some police and just plays it cool. But there's like the boat guy, the boat rental guy. We see him in a little bit actually complaining that, you know, these two Americans or possibly English people, because he can't tell, rented the boat and they might have stole the boat, or maybe something bad happened. But you know, that comes up more when he's leaving the hotel again, because he has to walk past this guy making his report and just has to hope that he doesn't turn around and sees him, because if he sees Ripley, he'll say, hey, that's one of the guys. Where's my boat? And that, you know, the whole thing comes crumbling down. Like, he's so close here to the whole thing just collapsing. Now, obviously, some of these things are going to pop up in the, you know, maybe we won't see them, but we're probably going to hear that the police did find that boat, that maybe they have found Dickie's body. Although it did look like it went to like a really deep trench, so maybe they won't find his body. But you know, they'll probably talk to the concierge, who looks very suspicious when Ripley asks for both passports back. He's like, where's your friend? Why are you checking out at this weird time? He's like, oh, he's waiting for me at the train station. Can I have the passports? And the guy is very reluctant, but he hands them over, but he's staring daggers into Ripley the entire time. I think what I really appreciate about all of this segment is that even when Ripley goes up to the hotel room and he's just trying to get stuff out of the safe, he looks out the window to sort of like scan and see what's going on, see if there's like a lot of commotion, or the police up to like searching or anything. The maid in the hotel comes in and it like is like a jump scare when the door knocks. And I thought it did a really good job of making us feel as on edge as he is. because we got a jump scare the way he did, right? He's on edge where it's something completely normal, and then it happens again in the train, actually, because the window cleaner, like, he shuts his eyes, and then there's like a big slam against the window, and it's the window cleaner just, squeegeeing the glass. So I think that was really effective, and I think it's where, like, the story almost becomes simpler and lets the direction and the visuals just completely take over. And when it's doing that, like, I'm just kind of in cinematic, like, bliss mode, honestly. Like, I really liked this episode. And I enjoyed the last two episodes. There was definitely moments that I felt some of this magic. And at the start of this episode, I was even thinking to myself that, oh, I mean, this is fun, like, him being concerned that his dad sent him a letter. Maybe part of me thought we wouldn't even get to know what that letter was until the end of the episode, and it ended up being all set up for the rest of the episode, and we'd be to it within the first, like, 15 minutes. But I wouldn't say relieved. Relieved's not right, but I was very happy with the idea that it moved on from what it was. Because, he got to Dickie and Marge in episode 1, and then we spent all of episode 2 with him interacting with them. And part of me thought that was going to be most of the show. Part of me thought that we were going to be with him just sort of, like, pretending to be a friend until, like, episode 6 or 7. So I was actually very excited by the fact that we were moving things so dramatically forward by this point. And again, people who know the story from the book or from other movies or whatever, like, obviously would never have expected that, because they know that this murder feels like it's probably the end of Act 1 in the movie, if I was to guess. So because of that, other people won't have, like, that sort of, like, not knowing what to expect that I did. But for me, this was very exciting because it felt like a really big stepping stone happened in the story. And it felt like we had built up to this for 2.5 episodes. It felt like a big deal that he was going through with this. And then the idea that we have to, like, then watch him try and, like, cover his tracks afterwards and almost get caught. And because all it would take is one person to stop him and ask him some questions, and the whole thing might come crumbling down. And that feeling of being on edge was so good throughout. And some of the best shots of the whole show were in this episode as well, with all the water stuff. Really, really good stuff. So he gets into a train, and leaves the town as quickly as he can. Obviously, I do expect we're going to see Marge. I wonder if we see Marge finding out about a lot of what's happened. Like, maybe that's how we'll see some of the investigation, is via Margie's perspective, when she then wants to find out what's happened and comes into the city to, figure out and invest. Maybe not investigate, maybe that's not the right word. I'm not saying she's going to become a PI, but maybe she'll come looking for Ripley because she suspects that it's him. She knows who's behind it and she wants to prove it, kind of thing. Wouldn't surprise me if that's at least part of where this goes, but very, very cool. Also, another little filmmaking touch that I really liked, I kind of glossed over it earlier, is when Ripley's reading the letter that he got, telling him that he's done with the job that Dickie's father sent him on. They do this thing where it's like he's sitting on the other side of the table, so it's like Dickie's dad's at his workplace on one end of the desk, and then it cuts back to Ripley, who's at Dickie's desk, and it kind of goes backwards and forwards like they're having a conversation at the table. I really liked that. I thought that was a really nice little thing, where it's almost like Ripley's still, even though he's not actually talking to him, he's still thinking about how he can try and talk his way out of this, or try and extend it just a little bit, try and weasel his way a little bit further, but obviously he can't because he's not actually talking to him. But again, a really nice stylistic choice. Again, it's just oozing style. It's oozing little creative decisions about how to present certain moments. And now that he's actually went through with this, and we've seen him do the unthinkable, we've seen him murder someone. It's like, okay, now we know how desperate he can get. We know how much this means to him, and how he might react if he's put into a corner. We saw him in a corner in this episode. Maybe in this case it was an easier one because, one, the location was perfect, and also because he was kind of planning something like this anyway. But when he's trying to just stay on the run and he's trying to use Dickie's identity, and how successful is that going to be? Is he going to encounter problems? And is that how Marge follows him? Because she is able to find out that the checking account or whatever's been used somewhere. I don't know. But either way, my mind got going with all the possibilities. Yes, the episode ends with Ripley putting on the ring, finally. And we kind of end on a shot of that as the episode goes to black. So, no, really good stuff. Really, really exciting episode. It felt like a great culmination to the story so far. and we're moving on to the next phase. And the next phase, I do think, is even more exciting because it's more of him trying to, I'm not saying it was feeling stale yet, but I could have seen it becoming stale if it was just him trying to keep the ruse up that he's a friend around Dickie and Marge. We'd already had him being caught doing stuff, and then it seemed to be normal afterwards. If they kept doing that, I think it would have become a problem. But because it's like, no, we've moved on now at the right time, and it's enough that Marge is going to be very suspicious and basically just assume it's him that he's done something bad because he was this weirdo who was around, and she was always suspicious of him. So, very excited to see where this goes from here. So I'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next episode. But this has been my thoughts on episode 3 of Ripley. Just a visually stunning episode, very well paced, and it really is at its best when the dialogue fades away and it's just seeing the character try and solve problems, nefarious problems of his own making, but that stuff is fun on a raw level, and the constant sort of tension of when is he going to get caught, because occasionally he does get caught. He's not that perfect at it, and he's kind of stupid sometimes. So, or maybe clumsy is a better word. He's clumsy sometimes. But anyway, that's the episode. So you can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, and you can like, subscribe, all the usual things on YouTube. All that helps out a bunch. So thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?